Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Good Book Club. It is Sunday morning. It is September 14th. We're starting at a little bit of an earlier time for this new book club season. This is our first installment of our 25-26 year. We are in the 6th year of the book club, if you can believe that. It's absolutely amazing. And I'm hoping that I'm spotlighted here. I can't tell
Oh
on my
yeah,
grid.
no,
I know it's crazy. So I'm going to read our mission statement, which I always do at the beginning of each book club. We've been reading this for now going on 6 years, and I think we've done a really good job of sticking to, kind of why we created the book club for everybody. The Good Book Club mission statement. The Good Book Club was created to bring together nuanced Mormons, post-Mormons, and others with a shared interest in Mormonism. We are introspective, critical thinkers seeking to learn, connect, and build relationships through the catalyst of literature. We welcome all who are searching for a safe space to share authentic thoughts, feelings, and ideas through open dialogue and shared experience relative to Mormon culture. As we deconstruct, sorry, my little boxes are popping up. As we deconstruct previous beliefs, we encourage all to find happiness in the process of discovering new religious ideologies, spirituality, and life philosophies. That is the mission statement of the Good Book Club. So someday maybe I'll make us all repeat it. I don't know. We want to make sure that we show everybody our book list for the entire year. We're a user-led book club, so we voted on all these books. If you guys want to freeze your screen and see what is coming up, it's absolutely amazing. And I think we have book club discussion leaders for almost every single book, except for, I think there's one more. Yep, there it is. December. We're going to have Dan McClellan coming to talk about The Bible Says So, what we get right and wrong about Scripture's most controversial issues. And as far as I know, he is going to be able to pop in and attend with us, but we need somebody to lead this discussion. So if you're interested, shout out in the chat or send me a personal message, Facebook, email. Just let us know if anybody would be willing to lead that discussion with Dan McClellan. Really quickly, a few upcoming events for the book club. I wanted to make sure everybody knew of some other reading opportunities that are out there on the radar right now. We have Ganesh Sharian's wonderful book, Joseph Smith, The Architect of Mormonism, a topical biography. All of these books I'm going to share here are on Amazon. We have the highly anticipated David Archuleta biography, Devout. This is going to be really interesting because, as we all know, he was an LDS darling, if I can say that. They really love to have him out there promoting the church. And then when his life, went a different direction, he pretty much was shunned. So I'm very interested to read his biography. Again, all these are either available for pre-order or they're already out. Shattered Trust, our good friend and book club member Lila Tuller has written this book where she's compiled experiences of people who have experienced religious trauma in the LDS Church. And yeah, it's getting quite the response and reception with lots of reviews. So these are some books if you guys want some extra books. Okay, we're really excited about what we're reading for October. Our presenter is Jim Smith. He's absolutely incredible. And this book is The Mound Builder Myth, Fake History, and the Hunt for a Lost White Race. If you grew up thinking that all the ideas in the Book of Mormon were just completely innovative and unique, no. If you know anything about history, this will blow your mind. This is already what everybody thought, because they appropriated the culture and thought that, well, I don't need to get into the whole topic of the book, but this is going to be really interesting to a lot of you, and we're very excited. So get this book and start reading. This is for October 12th, 10 a.m. And that brings us, finally, we're so excited today. We are so excited. When this book came out last year, Landon and I, we're going to kind of sort of lead the discussion today. It's more of a Q&A. When this book came out, we had the chance to interview Laurie Lee on her signature book. Yeah, and a couple episodes of Mormonish podcast. And we were really thrilled to be able to read this book in book club for this season. We're talking about Dictates of Conscience, From Mormon High Priest to My New Life as a Woman. Laurie Lee Hall, welcome to the Good Book Club. How are you this morning?
I'm great, thank you. I'm so excited to have been welcomed here. First book of your new fiscal year. Thank you so much for including Dictates of Conscience in this dialogue, in this discussion.
Yep. I wish we had a fiscal aspect, don't you, Landon?
Yeah, there's not non-fiscal year.
Our non-fiscal year. That's right. We're not fiscal yet. Maybe someday, right? So no, no, this book has just had such an impact, and you have definitely been on so many different podcasts and so many different platforms. I guess my first question, just to kind of start everything out, is what has it been like this whirlwind of the last year since the book came out? Because you've been everywhere, you've talked to everyone, and it must just have been incredible.
It has been. It's been everything I could have hoped for and more. Um, as I mentioned in the discussion prior to the show, once the book came out last November and we did several introductory interviews, my I set my personal goal for 2025 um, to help do all that I could to expand this story's audience beyond LDS and LGBTQ intersectionality to as large an audience nationwide, across spectrums, across types of people's experiences as possible, because I anticipated, and we've seen it. It's very difficult not to be political in our conversation because who I am has been politicized. And it's very important to me that this story and 10,000 other stories and voices and hearts get shared to help, as I said in the book, contradict and instruct against the tsunami of negative, polarizing religious and political backlash against folks in my community. The scapegoating and targeting that we've experienced, I felt a need to share my story because of its uniqueness. Uh, and I never realized until I was close to publication just how critical this need would be. And so, show me a microphone, show me a camera. I want to talk about this.
No, and we're so glad that you are. We absolutely are. And I'll remind everybody again, if you have a question, please, like we see already, Bruce and then Mark, raise your hand. Landon and I will kind of be moderating and just kind of calling on you, and then you guys can talk and we'll just get this discussion going. So Bruce, I think you had your hand up first with a question.
Yeah, basically, I live in Southern California. I grew up here, and did my time at BYU. Left the church right after my mission mentally, but I didn't actually resign until about 10 years ago. But how do you find Kentucky as a place for a sexual minority to live? I know Pasadena, Cara and Jeff, Mylene and I are in Southern California. This is a really easy place to be a sexual minority. How is it in Kentucky?
Excellent question, Bruce. Kentucky certainly has some well-deserved uh, sensitivity layered upon the people here, but I moved here from Salt Lake City 7 years ago. As I described in the book, how I got here, I have found folks in Kentucky generally to be some of the nicest people I've ever lived around. We're in the Louisville area. Louisville is about as much of a Midwestern and Northern kind of city as anything in the South could be. I find that there's a vibrant LGBTQ community in Louisville. But certainly, as I describe in Dictates of Conscience, we live in a very red county, in a very red state for the most part. But people have been very kind. The only thing I've seen in the 7 years that I've been here is, I think, a lot of the general population who may not have gotten to know someone like me prior have felt empowered by their local civic leaders and even their national leaders to be more wary and perhaps judgmental of those they don't understand. And so, whereas I could go about, visit the stores, walk on the street, and just, feel comfortable, I'm getting, some folks that kind of look at me suspectingly and maybe a little bit concerned. Not too much that's, that I could label as highly discriminatory, but there's an edge now that didn't exist 7 years ago. And I don't think that's bottom up. I think that's top down.
Great. Thank you.
Oops, sorry about that. Mark, did you have a question?
Well, actually, I wanted to share something. So I'm from Belgium, and Laurie Lee, I like to share your message. I think it's very important. So I bought 3 of your books and also the Audible version. And I sent one of your books to Petra de Sutter, who was the Vice Prime Minister of Belgium, the first transgender in Europe to be in a federal government. And she is now the head of the University of Kent. And I'm sure she will like her message. The second book I gave to a friend of mine who's an Elders Quorum president in the Mormon Church. And he brings a transgender every week to the church. I would say the local leaders in Belgium do not follow the stupid rules that the church has given about transgenders. And she feels very welcome. She only has a problem with 2 members, and that's Elder Nelson and Elder Oaks. I wonder why. But in Belgium, we have a totally different view of what you have in the United States, I think. I call them the divided states. Because LGBTQ people are well liked here and well loved, and we respect their rights. And I respect you and the courage you have to write this book, and I think it's a very important message, and I'm trying to help you to spread it.
Mark, thank you so much. That's thrilling for me to hear every bit of your report. I'm grateful for it. Encourage everyone else to do the same. I was particularly excited when a member of the Utah State Legislature shared Dictates of Conscience several months ago with the Speaker of the Utah House. It's just, I appreciate that. The story is out there. I'm happy to be able to share my experience in all honesty and integrity to try to put a face to this experience that I've had and that so many others have.
And that makes you a missionary, Mark. you're walking around passing out a book. It's perfect. So,
well, I have the Mormon Church to thank for that.
That's right. Always a missionary. That's it. So, and I know Kate has a question. Before that, I'm going to say maybe, Laurie Lee, if you could just give a little synopsis, because I started to realize that if we do put this out wider, everybody may not be fully aware. They may not have read the book like all of us. So my question would just be, sort of, why was this the time for you to write this? And maybe just give a very brief, kind of a little synopsis of the book.
Sure. No, I alluded in my response just now to the fact that I have kind of a unique story. And just very briefly, that unique circumstance that I found myself in 14 years ago was within the Mormon Church. Ecclesiastically, I was the sitting stake president. And in my employment, I was the chief architect or senior architect for the church's temples worldwide. At the time when I accepted myself finally at age 50 as a transgender individual. I had been fighting gender identity throughout my life and gender dysphoria, and finally came to grips with that and realizing that I needed I had both just my mind and spirit understood that about myself, and I had spiritual experiences that helped me know that I was on the track that God had made me to be on. And that came out to senior church leaders. And in the process of all of that, I was put out of my calling. I was put on probation at work, eventually put in a position where I could no longer work for the church. I was ultimately excommunicated. My marriage was blown up. My family in various states of disarray. I was blackballed in terms of being able to practice my profession in Utah, and just a number of things that made this a very unique and interesting conflicting story. And yet, as I prepared the manuscript and watched what was happening around us here in the divided states, as Mark called them, I realized that this story needed to be told, not just because it was interesting to people at that Latter-day Saint LGBTQ intersection, but because our whole environment, politically and religiously here, at least in the United States, needed to hear this voice, this story, as well as so many others. And if I could be brave enough to share my story and then plead and encourage with others who have had similar or different experiences going forward to tell their stories, because of the villainization that is occurring against our community. So that's a teaser, I guess, Rebecca.
Perfect. Okay.
That's excellent. Landon, I thought you had something to say right there.
No, I was just one of the questions that I actually had for Laurie Lee was, this book, when we interviewed you a year ago at Signature Book, this was an important topic, from the trans standpoint, but also at the point at that time we had a lot of things going on with temple building and stuff, and that was interesting as well. But in light of just the things that happened this week, I think this book now transcends even the kind of the Mormon angle and goes to a much wider audience. And can you speak about that, and maybe how you see this possibly? Because I think this is a book now that needs to be read by more than just LDS people who might have. But to understand and empathize and see this in a much larger context.
That's Landon. That is a great observation, and as has often been the case in my storytelling and in my experience, it seems like this story winds up in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. If there was, I don't know if there's a meter out there that since Wednesday's events could identify what topics are getting pinged on. Maybe you're aware of something like that, but Mormon and trans must be in the top 10 of single key words that are getting pinged on. And here in Dictates of Conscience is the quintessential story of Mormon and trans together at the right place in the right time. I don't think I'm being too narcissistic in saying that. This is if someone wants to understand Mormonism intersecting with transgender identity, in all fairness and as clearly and concisely as I could say it, it is Dictates of Conscience. This is, I believe, as you said, Landon, worthy of reading to understand the context. Although I'm not certain that the events of this week really have anything to do with a transgender person or necessarily a person with Mormon background. But it sure is getting talked about. And That's one of the reasons why I think dictates of conscience is important, because there is so much misinformation. Here's a source that I propose at least lays a foundational understanding of where I see truth lying.
Yep. Thank you for that, Laurie. Kate, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, so kind of on a different topic, Laurie Lee, you mentioned in your book several times several powerful spiritual experiences that were personal to you. As much as you feel comfortable, where has your spiritual journey led you in the last few years?
It's a great question, Kate. One that I am frequently asked. One of the underlying thoughts about the title Dictates of Conscience, my response to my disciplinary counsel when I said that all I really want to be able to do is to worship God according to the dictates of my conscience, and my conscience confirms to me that I am a daughter of God. And then I tell the story about how not long thereafter, I realized I'd actually been given the freedom to, take off the shackles of this is the doctrine and dogma of the one true religion, and I got to choose for myself where I went from there with it. And I referred to that somewhat as an important responsibility. I felt the weight of responsibility to make choices going forward with regard to my spirituality and my spiritual journey. And so to report to you now, 7 years later, almost 8 years later now, I have continued a spiritual journey. I think I have developed a greater level of hope, hope taking the place of where there may have once been a sense of certainty, hope for things that I have tasted, like divine love and the reality of life beyond this life, the sense that divinity is interested in my life and in all of our lives, the great responsibility we each have to choose how we live and to look forward to what I think is a great adventure in the experiences to come, not just in this life, but in the future beyond this life. I have reached a point in my life where I'm not comfortable or willing to saddle myself with anyone's explanation, including my own, of what deity is and what constraints I'm supposed to live by. But I seek to live a positive and good life as a captain of my ship, and well in touch with what we referred to in Mormonism as the gift of the Holy Ghost. I feel that spiritual guidance in my life, although I would be reticent to assign that name to it generally, because that can be known in many other religions by other names, other terms. I feel like I've become more of a universalist in my general feelings, although again, not confined to any particular doctrine or dogma. It's been very freeing. It's been a very peaceful and happy place to be spiritually for me, and one that I think my favorite word associated with it is hopeful. It's beyond faith in something. It's a hope for everything and many things.
I think that's great. Bruce, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I just, I stepped away from the church after my mission in the late 70s, but I still believed until the last decade. But the one thing that I never could reconcile is spiritual experiences, because I had them as a member, especially as a missionary. But I had, I did management and care of my parents and their family business, and I would have spiritual experiences on the way out, figuring out what to do. But going out to their house, I had been at a gay bathhouse the night before, messing around a lot. And it was always confusing to me. Okay, I was raised saying, okay, this is all the bad you shouldn't be doing. And then the next day when I had responsibilities, I would have those same spiritual experiences. So I've kind of come to where thinking that a lot of that is internal, how we biologically developed. But I know in the group here, there's, a wide variety of how we interpret what, outside of us or a spirit. And then, so you haven't found another community that's giving you, the rules to follow. Because,
No.
I know there are people here who do, and community is important, but I was just always confused, like, how could I be, being very sinful from the Mormon point of view, but still have the exact same spiritual experiences I had as a missionary?
It's a great observation, and I don't, in everything I say, I don't want to suggest that there's one right way. That's the whole point. There isn't a single place to be. Wherever someone is and where they feel comfort, where they feel the community they need, I'm great with that. One of the things I tried to convey in Dictates of Conscience is that while I was 24/7 deep into Mormonism, I was having spiritual experiences, some great ones, some profound ones, some things that I treasure and recognize them for what they are. But also to recognize that once I was put out of Mormonism and began to choose for myself, none of that went away.
Yeah, exactly.
And therefore, as I can continue to live my life, I look for those, I recognize those, I express gratitude to, to God, to deity, to the Holy Ghost, to the universe, whatever you call it.
Yeah.
Then that tunes my heart to be more receptive, and it seems to continue to flow. Whatever and whyever that is, I'm not willing to define, but I'm really good with it. I'm happy that life is that way for me at this point. And I love and support anyone who has found a way to move themselves forward in Mormonism or beyond Mormonism, or having never experienced Mormonism. Life is good and life is hopeful, and I'm happy to share it with others.
Laurie Lee, we have a question in the chat. And the question is, there seems to be a difficulty or a taking away of identity with Mormonism. I have found that true in my life. When you were young, was your identity as a female clear, or is it just clear now that you look back at those times? Were you able to be that self-aware in your youth or identity?
That's a good question. Just for clarification, I didn't interface with Mormonism until I was 18 and in college. So my experiences with gender identity and gender dysphoria, terms that didn't exist when I was a child and a youth, but applying today's terms to what I did experience as a child and a youth, were not through the lens of Mormonism, but through my own experiences. I was certainly self-aware, as I describe in the book, of my female nature, and eventually got to the point before I left for college where I said, enough is enough. I have no way forward to live like that. 1979, it wasn't available to me. And so I was also very conscious of the fact that I had to bury that So awareness of what that was, yeah, I was pretty aware of what that was, and that it was a huge part of me, and that I was making a conscious decision to crush it and never let it be a part of who I was, which didn't work well. And eventually got to the point where I could no longer suppress it, had to figure out what was going on, and came to an acceptance and an understanding, both, as I mentioned, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually.
Oh, looks like Cameron has a question. Thank you,
Yeah,
Laurie. We're just so excited to have you here. You're just amazing.
sorry, super excited.
I
Laurie Lee,
know.
thank you for joining, and thanks for your integrity and sharing your story with all of us. I am a dad of a transgender kid. I'm also a nuanced Mormon, kind of agnostic, deconstructed, but I still participate on the inside of the church. Um, I'm often discouraged in this time because it's so hard, with the recent policy decisions within the church, with the things going on in our states and our country, laws that are being passed that are discriminatory. I try not to get discouraged, but I'm thankful for you sharing your story because it gives me hope. But I would love to hear your perspective on what can people like myself do, or even people on the outside of the edge that are no longer participating. I feel like within the nuanced and post-Mormon space, the transgender issues are often forgot about, ignored. I don't know. I don't feel like there's the same advocacy for things. The inconvenient faith thing that came out a few weeks ago was a great example of how they completely ignored the trans issue in all of those episodes. I'm trying to be an advocate wherever I can, and I feel like it's a really hard time. So I would just love your perspective, because I admire so much of what you've done.
Thank you, Cameron. I love, 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 love parents of trans kids. And, I honor and thank you for what you're doing. Statistically, you are literally saving your child's life. And I think you know that. So it's hypercritical that you're there and that others are there for them. I had similar experiences with an inconvenient faith. As we watched all of the episodes last week, my companion Nancy, who I talk about in the book, was needling me the whole time. Why aren't you in this? Why aren't you in this? Part of the reason was a lot of it was made 6 years ago, and trans was even less on the radar back then. I've certainly been around for 6 years and in the public sphere, but it wasn't as big a deal. They didn't stop and say, as I was fortunately able to with Dictates of Conscience, on August 19th of 2024, when the restrictions came out from the church, I was finishing my afterword, and we decided to completely scrap what I wrote in the afterword. And I specifically addressed that very week what that restrictive policy said and what it was doing to us as transgender Latter-day Saints. And I'm so grateful that got into the book at that moment in time, because it was so critical to stand as a primary document against what's currently being taught by church leaders. And you asked the question specifically, what should we be concerned about? What can I do? So using the transgender restriction policy as the text for my answer, just two very horrible things, very negative things are promoted explicitly and not so explicitly in that restriction policy. The first is that the only thing that matters is biological sex assigned at birth. And gender on the part of the church has been conflated incorrectly with biological sex assigned at birth. That is the most damning thing that the church can put in place to negate the lived experience of their transgender members. To me, it's the death knell of a transgender person being able to find community, whether they realize it at this point or at some future point in their walk in the church. It is until that decision to conflate those two terms together, until that goes away and somebody finally says, hey, back in 1995 we said gender was eternal and we meant it. Until that happens, there's really no place for a transgender Latter-day Saint. Now, as I pointed out in the book, the medically and scientifically proven process to mitigate, reduce, and in my case, solve debilitating gender dysphoria, which I had experienced throughout my life, is to transition away from my biological sex at birth, using the language of the restrictions. That was critical for my life, to be able to continue to live as a healthy, active, normal person. The church has chosen to make that important mental and physical health decision the reason for these onerous restrictions. And in doing so, basically slams the door on that topic to anyone who takes that step out of necessity, as I did prior to their restrictions being announced. I lost my church membership over that. I'm one of few who did. Many others have found it impossible to continue their church participation because of that. And I mourn that. That was the first. The second thing that the restrictions do, and this is more subtle, but more subversive, I think, is they cause membership and particularly church leaders to view transgender persons, those who have transitioned away from their biological sex at birth, as a threat to the membership of the church, particularly a threat to vulnerable populations within the church. And so why do I bring those two things up? Because as someone in your situation who still can safely be at church, those are clearly the two messages that you can every day, every week, every conversation try to help others understand that those are not true, and that your child is not a threat to anyone. They're not a threat to their young men's or young women's group where they might be going on an overnight experience. They are not dangerous. They deserve to have an opportunity to attend where they feel safe. They someday might have an opportunity to teach a class, to work with others. They need to have those experiences. They don't need to have to be monitored in their bathroom use. There's no reason for these things. So at the end of the day, I bring up those two concerns because I want it to be crystal clear in anyone's mind who happens to run into a church member. Those are the two issues that need to be emphasized in whatever loving, honorable way you happen to be able to find yourself in a position to do. Does that help?
Yes, I totally agree. Yes, thank you.
Okay. If I could articulate it more clearly, I would, but I've done the best I can in articulating those two thoughts.
Laura, Jackie, I see you've got your hand up, but before we leave this, I'd like to ask a second question, kind of a follow-up to Cameron's, that's very similar, because you have the unique perspective in that you've been a stake president. You've also experienced this identity. What if you were a stake president today, having lived the experience that you have now, and a parent who is fully believing comes in and asks you, that they have a trans child and they're looking for advice on how to deal with that, and maybe they even have I don't agree with this. How do I approach my child? What advice would you give to that parent? And likewise, if that child came in and asked for advice, what advice would you give the child?
Well, those are a ton of ifs that if I could possibly figure out how that condition could exist if it were today, and if I had if I knew then everything I know now, if I was still in a position where they trusted me with priesthood keys to run a stake, I know how I responded to certain things 13 years ago when I was still serving. And take my explanation of the Prop 8 time frame that I give in the book. I gave that experience to help demonstrate that there were times when I wasn't that church leader who sounded the alarm and towed the line exactly the way senior brethren were telling me to. I would have probably been released if they knew what I was up to or not up to in that case. So what happens when I bring a parent or a couple of parents? What happens if I'm stake president and Cameron comes in and describes to me their concern for their child who has come out as gender nonconforming? My experience as a stake president 15, 20 years ago was always one of compassion, always one of acceptance, always one of interest in helping the individual feel loved and accepted and included, including whatever was necessary to adjust things to allow that person to find a place to fit. I think that there were bishops and maybe even stake leaders in the 2020 to 2024 timeframe that utilized how the handbook was written at that time to, maybe jostle things to local interpretations and allow people to be themselves and to serve and to belong, that the 2024 restrictions pretty well took away. But I would have definitely been one of those leaders that would have found a place for a trans kid to safely participate in as much as possible. I mentioned the Prop 8 situation, and I haven't told this story a lot, but an adult gay man who was a youth in my stake at the time that Prop 8 came out, he's present day openly gay, has married the love of his life, and so forth and so on, still has a good relationship with his Latter-day Saint parents. But back when Prop 8 was out and about, he was not out. He was struggling internally in the closet and active in the church, in the young men's group and so forth. He reached out to me and said he was so grateful when he read that story about how I treated Prop 8, because for that season, I protected the church situation so that it didn't become toxic for him in his tender situation. And, my heart melted to realize that I helped the one, and there were probably others who my quote unquote disobedience to those above me protected someone who ultimately was able to go on and live as they needed to, as they chose to, as opposed to suffering as a young person more than they needed to, more than they already did.
Thank you. Jackie, you want?
Yeah, thank you, Laurie Lee, for being with us. So my wife and I were heavily involved with affirmation in the 1990s.
Uh-huh.
We were involved with the Los Angeles chapter and knew the leadership and involved. In fact, we were recipients of the Mortensen Award, and so we are on the committee, and we are very well aware of your service to affirmation and know of you from that venue. So thank you to your service for your service to that organization.
And to you as well. Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome. So, but as you know, there is a rift in affirmation between those of us who are involved in the 1990s, and sometimes we call it affirmation 1.0 and affirmation 2.0, correct?
Mhm.
And some of us that were involved in before feel that there was kind of like a more of a shift toward being trying to find more of a what do you call it an acceptance within the church versus more of an acceptance within ourselves, right? And and now as you've gone through your story and you're kind of here where you're more of like you I feel like you've kind of where you're more of acceptance of your own spirituality and you're not as much fighting to be like going to church every Sunday and attending all the meetings and that. Do you find that you're are you much into that for affirmation? If you are, I don't know how involved you are in it now as much. Do you find that you want to keep that kind of where are you in that? Where are you in that group? Are you
Yeah.
trying, do you know what I'm trying to ask? Where are you? Are you trying to find that to stay, keep people stay in the church and find the acceptance there, or to more find the acceptance within themselves, I guess is where I'm at.
Well, I'm very familiar with the 1.0 and 2.0 description. And if anything, the time frame in which I served on the board and in the executive committee of affirmation, we were at least a 2.5,
Yeah.
I think. And because of my circumstance as an excommunicant within the executive committee, I was always on leaning on the side of um, we need to be the best affirmation that we can be, regardless of whether the church likes us or not. We also served in a particular time when, a few years ago, when allies, it was almost like the new ally group of the week for LGBTQ people. And any ally led group that was particularly, I mean, it just filled the void particularly along the Wasatch Front and the Mormon corridor of every possible flavor of Mormon church accepting ally-led LGBTQ sensitive groups. All of those things existed, which helped affirmation to, I think, during our leadership, shift more away from the 2.0 to, if you'll accept me, a 2.5 that was able to speak with church leaders, but not interested in telling anyone where they needed to be in terms of their spirituality. It's baked into affirmation's current vision and mission statement to accept folks for wherever they are in their spirituality. And there is no intent that, like North Star or other groups that figure out how to do gay or lesbian, or if that were ever possible, trans, the way the church wants it done. That was never anything that we ever taught or promoted. So, and I think I was the one who was farthest left of that, on that subject anyway, always trying to say we are not trying to tell people where they belong in their spirituality or their church participation. We stopped doing a lot of the things that 2.0 did that made the meetings feel churchy. The conferences didn't feel particularly churchy as time went on. And I think that's appropriate. I was grateful that ultimately those whose journey to authenticity, to trusting in themselves, moved them away from the church, that they had a place to land and heal and feel safe in affirmation. I don't participate a lot right now. It's affirmation, quite frankly, has become a very active organization in Latin America.
Yeah.
I'm not in Latin America. And so I observe what my friends down there are doing. There's a lot less being done up here in the States. I was heavily involved in creating chapters and so forth in Europe and in Asia, and I still have contact with many of those folks. But it's hard when you're that much more dispersed and in different places. But to the simple answer to your question is that I definitely promote the individual trusting themselves and finding their way with as much support as they want or need. And if they wanted to contribute and help others do the same, come aboard. Here's a place where you can help.
Perfect. Thank you.
Laurie Lee, you're so well spoken and so seems like reasonable and rational when it comes to discussing these issues. Has having written this book, has anyone from church leadership reached out to you with the LGBTQ issues that are kind of forefront in the church, to ask your opinion or to ask for input? And I know you've been excommunicated and they don't like to reach out to excommunicated people. So did they ever reach out prior to that to see, kind of get your input on how maybe the church could handle these issues differently than they currently are?
It would have been really slick, since I was in the room with the first presidency and other leaders of the church for most of the 5 years that I was out to them as transgender. It would have been really slick if any of them had ever taken me aside and said, hey, we trust you on so many other subjects. If I told them that the church office building wasn't going to fall down, they believed me because I had developed that level of confidence in them in my professional technical work. It would have been really swell if they said, hey, everything else aside, let's just sit and talk about this issue. How do you really feel? And what causes you to feel this way? And what's this all about? And yeah, it never happened. Wouldn't it have been great? They had access to me. They didn't take advantage of that. January 29th, 2015, then Elder Oaks said, we have a lot of learning to do regarding transgender. We haven't done a lot of teaching on that. We've got a lot to learn about that. Well, by that point, 3.5 years, I had been talking to them about my circumstances and my situation. If there was a genuine interest in speaking with someone who was at that time still trusted and faithful as a Latter-day Saint, I was there. I literally walked the halls with them. They knew me by name. They knew my phone number. All they had to do was call, and in 5 minutes, I'd be sitting in front of their desk, as I always had been on other subjects. But if there was a desire to hear from someone who experienced those things, I'm not aware that they talked to anyone else either. But I was certainly available. And certainly, since the excommunication was primarily to shut me up, I felt some risk when I started preparing the manuscript and thinking about what's going to happen when this is published. I haven't heard a peep. seriously thought, it's possible Curtin McConkey's going to ring my bell and say, wait a minute, hasn't happened. I'm kind of glad that hasn't happened, but again, I'm still available. I can still think and talk in the context of Latter-day Saint Church leadership. If they want to read the book, it's available. Maybe some have, I don't know. But certainly no one's come back and said, hey, thanks for sharing this. This is accurate. I mean, my appendices are filled with letters of me back and forth to senior church leaders who still are there, them explaining what their concerns were and me explaining what my concerns were. I've just put it out there as honestly and as fairly as I could. And as I have often said since the time of my excommunication, if anything I say is embarrassing to someone, it's because their actions may be embarrassing.
Yvonne, I think you had your hand up next, if I'm reading the order correctly. Oops, Yvonne, are you muted? Or maybe it's my speaker.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
There she is.
I was trying to do it on my.
Yeah.
So, Laurie Lee, I just have to tell you that my introduction to you was your John DeLynn Mormon Stories in 2017, I believe, and I would recommend that if anybody's hearing this recording or has any doubts about what kind of person you are, and a lot of people don't read anymore, I guess, but I did read that. I could not deny listening to that. It brought me to tears many times. Your extreme sincerity and the quality of an individual that you are. And I did appreciate reading the book. I read it even before the book group assigned it, but I'm a fan. And I just want to quote one thing from your book, which I can't understand, but you yourself in the afterword, give the church a path forward in how it can address this issue by quoting their own proclamation, which says that gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. So I don't have a question. I just would recommend that podcast and just say bravo to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That original Mormon Stories podcast is divided up in 4 parts. I think it's their episodes 770 through 773 or something like that. Standing in My Faith and Walking in My Truth or something like that was the title I cooked up for it. It was quite an experience. I was extremely raw at that time, and I had not learned how to articulate many of the concepts I now know how to articulate. I was just speaking as a babe in the woods who had just been blown out of my community of where I had spent my adult life building up the kingdom, literally and physically and ecclesiastically. So that thank you for noting that. It was it's quite an experience to go back and look at and listen to. And one of the things that folks seemed to hit upon then was that I really didn't have anger towards the church, and that shocked a lot of people at that time. And I think what I've heard through feedback about Dictates of Conscience is that it also is not a hit piece against the Latter-day Saint Church. It's simply a telling of what happened and how and when, without creating animosity and negativity. I should mention that there's a floater copy of Dictates of Conscience going around our ward and stake here, where a member of our bishopric two members of our stake presidency have handed it off to each other, and they're reading it through. These folks come into our home still, even though we don't attend, because they like us and they're interested, and they're very respectful of my story. So our local church leaders, feel good about it. So if by chance any active Latter-day Saint is curious enough to turn this particular discussion on, this is not a book to run away from. This is a book that will help you to maybe see things a little brighter and clearer. But I've never been interested in destroying someone's faith or tearing down the organization, other than to, I think it was Greg Prince, if you know Greg Prince, the author of Gay Rights in the Mormon Church. He once shared with me that in writing that, he hoped he was being a loving critic of the church, and he's still in the church and still participates. And he suggested to me that in writing my memoir, I might adopt some of a similar feeling of being a loving critic. And to some degree, I think I have had that in my mind and was able to do that. But thank you for those thoughts, Yvonne.
Oh, I love it. And you're absolutely right, Laurie Lee. I feel comfortable sharing this book with people that I wouldn't necessarily share other kinds of books, even though I think they need them. This book, there isn't that hesitation, because you just are such a loving person, and it just comes across in the book. I think that's why people have such an emotional reaction to it when they read it or even talk about it. So, Bruce, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just had, navigating family. You've had some time since were separated from the church and stuff. Any advice, or how do you manage those, family relationships as time has gone on?
It's tricky, because sometimes the church and belief in the church has gotten in the way of my relationship with family members. I wish that wasn't so, but I even see members of my family that are believing in the church and are committed to it, who are trying to work out that cognitive dissonance that they experience, that they want to have a connection and a relationship to me, but at the same time, they see me living differently than what their church leaders are telling them. Some have chosen to disconnect from me altogether because that's too hard for them. Some have nothing to do with me for completely unrelated reasons. But that seems to be the nature of parents and children in the 21st century. But there are some of my children who I just watched that are just being, tugged at. There's tension in their lives because they want a relationship with me, but they also want to be true to their beliefs as they understand them. And that's complicated. I try to meet members of my family that allow me to meet with them. I try to meet with them where they are and not rub on them too hard. But at the same time, I've had to be honest with them that, okay, you're telling your children, my grandchildren, that I'm not where God wants me to be. And yet I truly believe that I am exactly where God wants me to be. And you should feel okay telling your children that that's the case, and that there may be a different path than the one that they hear over the pulpit at General Conference, that it's okay to recognize that some of my grandchildren, of which there are 13 or 14, I lose count, are going to be, grow up and to become nuanced, or to be LGBTQ. So yeah. Some of them are going that way. And I try to prepare my children that'll listen to me. The day will come when, as parents of young children, those children will grow up and you'll have to face these challenges as a parent, like I had to face with them when they stopped following what I was doing and went their own ways. I'm lucky to have my never Mormon parents be very loving and comfortable with me at this point in our lives. And I'm very fortunate to have my partner, Nancy, and her family, who were all Latter-day Saints at one point, but aren't now. Their love and acceptance, it's kind of my extra family that I have gratefully obtained along the way. So in some cases, this is very true in the LGBTQ community. Sometimes you have the family you're born into. Yeah. Sometimes you have the family that you choose and that choose you. And that's really okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. No, and I think a lot of people that we talk to in book club, the idea of choosing your own family, that's kind of a theme, when your family from the past is not with you perhaps as they should be or as they were, and you kind of seek community. So we've found that in book club. At least I have, for sure. I think a lot of us have too. Jackie,
yeah, to some degree, we all need those kinds of connections that kind of, whether, I'm happy as a bug if somebody who shares DNA with me is willing to be a part of that. But sometimes our DNA is more spiritual DNA or cerebral DNA, and that's great too.
That's a great way to say it. I love that. Absolutely. Go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, my wife and I were just our friend that we met like over 30 years ago in affirmation. He has a term he calls all of us that we choose to be family together. We can't remember what we call each other. So anyway, yeah, it's all of our chosen family that we call each other. And yeah, sometimes it's much better.
My logical family.
Logical family. That's what we call each other. Our logical family. Versus biological family. Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to, I don't know that I really had a question built in here, but I wanted to say to Laurie Lee, thank you for bringing up a lot of trauma that I had to relive again. From the proclamation to the family to Prop 8 to the exclusion policy, which was the last straw for our now 26-year-old son, to all of that. But it was nice to see it not through my eyes, but through the eyes from someone who was living it as a faithful Latter-day Saint, and the way that you looked at it and the way that you handled it. Because for me, it really was trauma, and it was painful, and it was so utterly devastating. I mean, this thing that I would walk into people's living rooms and they just nonchalantly have it hanging on their walls, this proclamation to the family, to the world about the family. And to me, it was so painful. And then, of course, Prop 8, to hear you say you did not encourage your people to participate in that in any way, shape, or form.
Never even spoke of it.
That is, that was just so warming to my heart, because here in California, we know so many people that did, and we would go through and where we were at, we would go past the intersections on Saturday mornings, and our people we knew would be out on the corners with their signs. And one morning we were on our way to dance, and our daughter was in junior high at the moment, and she said to me, "Mom, pull over." And it was our stake that was out there at the moment, our ward. And she goes, "I want to talk to them." And she went up to them, and I didn't have anything to do with them. And she said, "Why are you doing this?" Because she was baptized at the time. And she said, "Why are you doing this? You welcome our family to church, and you know my family, and you say you love us. And why are you out here now doing this against our family?" And all they could say was, "Because the prophet tells us to." And it was so painful. And then about the time our son said, "I think I'll have the missionaries come," and then the exclusion policy came down, and it was just, but at the same time we had a bishop that came to our wedding, and he was amazing. So I know it was, those things were all very traumatic to hear again, but from your point of view as a faithful spiritual person and Latter-day Saint on the other side, it was it was different point of view. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing it from that point of view and hearing it from that point of view. And it was nice not to have the dogma tossed at us. So
Yeah.
I appreciated it from that point of view. So thank you very much.
Thank you. You're all individuals who are interested in books or interested in literature. Sometimes, I don't know if any of you are also authors. I'm a first-time author. This is not something I've ever done before. So this is really quite an experience for me. I used to write little 8.5 by 11 summary sheets of important items for the general authorities to consider with a recommendation on how they should decide based on the bullet points that I shared with them. I was a really effective technical writer, but writing a manuscript in prose and all of that, that was new to me. I had some great editorial help, but I'm also an individual I've discovered who has long, because of trauma, committed memory suicide, if I can use that term. I have murdered my memories of things that were traumatic in my past. There are so many holes in my memory that it's not even funny at this point. My cousin swore that I had attended her wedding when I was in my young adult pre-mission age. I swore to her I never had been there. And she produced a photograph that showed me walking into the chapel. And it's like, I don't know why I squelched that. I have no recollection of that day at all. So yeah, I'm a memoirist with serious memory problems. And in writing the manuscript, like you, I uncovered some really traumatic stuff. And I sat in this very spot in this chair at my computer, staring at the screen, bawling my eyes out as I started to unpack stuff that I had forgotten and saw connections that I hadn't realized were connections. Or when I realized that, hey, when that was done to me, that's how it felt, and some of that wound up in the manuscript and some of it didn't. But yeah, I was so grateful for Nancy, who, after I had struggled to write a few pages on one of those tough subjects, I could go and sit with her and let her hold me and kind of help me through it. Because, and I didn't want Dictates of Conscience to be a big downer, to where it was just too heavy of a thing to read. I wanted it to be a celebration and to be hopeful and to be joyful. And in the end, it is hopeful because I'm still here. And my message to everyone is that if you're struggling with all of these things or have struggled with all of these things or challenges, whatever they may be, I've had folks, who have physical disabilities or other, really difficult life circumstances that have nothing to do with being LGBTQ, come back and say, in your story, I relate that to what I'm experiencing. And I found strength to do what you did pertaining to my circumstances. And I go, mind blow, that's beyond what I could have imagined. I wanted it to be hopeful and to be that kind of relatable tool if people were to see themselves in it, and that's happened.
And can I say thank you, because we know the suicide rate is incredibly high. And so to see somebody with a successful story is only helpful. So thank you for putting that out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Without hitting anyone too hard over the head with the fact that, yeah, at different points in my life, I experienced that as well. I walked that road, I saw that darkness and lived through it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie.
Yeah, you make a difference to a lot of people. I hope that you know that. You really do. So probably people you'll never meet or never know.
Well, I get a lot of messages back.
I bet you do.
Yeah, that beyond my circle of friends. At Signature Books, we have always said that stories can touch hearts and stories can change hearts. And in my particular story, we think stories are going to save lives. This story could save lives. And that's a burden, that's a responsibility that I take very seriously. And I'm also grateful to contribute in that way.
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left. Mylene's had her hand up for quite a while, and Gretchen had her hand up. And it looks
I think
like Karen is
Karen's,
waving. So,
yeah,
Mylene,
waving
do you
at us
want to go
too.
ahead and ask your question, and we'll go to Gretchen and then Karen.
Perfect.
I think that I'm going to pass. I really appreciate the things that you've told us today, but I don't think in 10 minutes we're going to be able to deal with my question. But thank you
No,
again.
go ahead. We
no,
go
go
over,
ahead.
Mylene. Go ahead and ask. Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
loose time frame. I mean,
Loose time
especially when
frame.
we have when
Hey, we
have such a
started
gift.
Mormon time, so let's end Mormon
Let's
time.
end that
please,
way. That's
Mylene,
right.
Mylene, go ahead. Yeah, for heaven's sakes, yes.
Hey, I think that you've done a great service to be able to open up this topic and to make it more visible to a lot of people. And I have this weird position that I'm in where I tend to look at things like religion from maybe a sociological point of view and a personal point of view. So personally, I might look at something and say, okay, this just seems wrong. I mean, this doesn't seem like Christ would say something like reject this whole group of people because they're X, Y, and Z. But on the other hand, I look at it from a person who's just looking at an organization and I say, well, wait a minute. If you were, say, the adulteress in the Bible, and Christ said, okay, you guys are just wrong. Don't stone this person to death. This is which of you is better than she is? Let her go. But then again, he didn't say you shouldn't commit adultery. So it seems like when you deal with subjects of this complexity, like abortion, transgenderism, different things like that, you have to address it from two different perspectives. One, kind of, your personal perspective and what you have felt about your relationship to God is one issue. But whether or not the church should see that in the same light is a completely different issue. Can you relate to that?
Oh, absolutely. And, part of the notion of dictates of conscience is dealing with and finally landing, in my case, on my personal witness as opposed to the dogmatic teaching of the institution at this or that point in time, that I had to be good with being able to have my witness and the courage to step away from or to be thrust away from the organization and then continue walking without the organization with the confidence that my witness, my conscience was sufficient to get me through the rest of my life. And I didn't need the organization whose views of my circumstances aren't as mature, if I can use that term, as mine have become, because I have to deal with it because it's who I am, as opposed to they choose not to deal with it very well because it's not pressing for them. Or, maybe I'll stop there. But yeah, I absolutely get it. And I have said on other broadcasts that I've participated in, other interviews I participated in, that all of us, and particularly women in the church and women outside the church, but particularly women in the church, have been taught to always rely on someone else to give them the direction that they're supposed to follow in their life. And I'm saying pishta to that. Every individual in the church and all of those outside of the church have absolute right to know how to govern their lives and should feel empowered to seek that inspiration, direction, guidance, call it what you will, to guide their own lives, and the courage and the support from community to act accordingly.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a big question, and that was a really good answer. So thank you. Gretchen, I think you had a question, and then we'll go to Karen.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you, Laurie Lee. Thank you so much for this book. My experience has always been somewhat adjacent. I had a boyfriend who had a transgender family member way back, 30 plus years ago. I had a really good friend in back in like 2010 whose father was transgender, and so she was asking me kind of like what my opinions on this were, so I've always, like, I've had several adjacent experiences, but it's never been like my own kind of personal experience, if that makes sense. And so I've been, so trying to, and then in the framework of the church to say, okay, so how do I reconcile, being loving and accepting and embracing people as they are versus, of course, the church teaching. So in all of that, like, is through my faith transition too, that's made it easier to, as I've stepped away from the church. But in all of that, I felt like this is just something I don't understand. And it's not somebody else's job to educate me, but I've been trying to understand. And so, like, I just really appreciate your emotional vulnerability, because I felt like reading this book, I was able to get into your mind and heart in a way that helped me understand your experience in a way that I tried and I just wasn't able to. And that's why I love to read, is because I can get into other people's experiences in a way that you just can't from being adjacent to it. And so I just really expressed that appreciation that you were so vulnerable in this book, that I could, like, felt like I could feel your emotions and understand your experience in just such a beautiful way. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'll give credit again to my editor, Barbara Jones Brown. When I first started writing the manuscript, I think I was being a little bit of a news reporter. This happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. And she stopped me at every story and say, okay, how did that make you feel? And she taught me how to be able to draw out my feelings at each different point in time as a 5-year-old or a 14-year-old, et cetera, and to be more expressive that way and not just give a litany of the facts as they occurred, but to really try to speak to what that was doing for me or to me at the time. And there have been critics of my book who have said it really just wasn't expressive enough, but it was as expressive as I could bring myself to be in 80,000 words to cover this topic. And so I thank you for letting me know that you found your way into my head and heart, because that was my hope.
Yeah, I think a lot of us feel that way. I think all of us feel that way about the book. So, Karen, that's right. You had your hand up.
Yes, Laurie Lee, I want to thank you for this incredible discussion. I have not read the book. I get my books from Braille, and I'm on a wait list to get it. But I wanted to be in this discussion, even though I hadn't read the book, because I wanted to be enlightened about your experience. And I know that these are very troubled times for many people, but particularly for transgender. And I want to be part of the solution. And I just thank you deeply. And I'm very much looking forward to reading your book.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Karen. I'm sure you're aware, but I did record the whole book as well, so it's available in audio as well.
Yeah, somehow Braille didn't have it. And then Bruce said, oh, well, I'm listening to the audio. So then I got back to them, and there's a wait list, I guess. So isn't that a good thing?
Oh, I guess so. I have a
like to
dear
think
friend,
so.
one of my first readers. As soon as the audio version came out, um, she is unsighted, lives in Calgary, and she tried to access the book as much as possible. But when the audio book came out, she consumed it, and I'm really grateful for that. I'll tell one quick story about the audiobook. Um, I have two son-in-laws, coincidentally, who are dyslexic. And they're both, obviously they're adults, they're grandparents, or they're parents of nine of my grandchildren, but they really struggle with reading. Both happen to be traveling salesmen, so they spend a lot of time in their cars. And both, I think, they hadn't had the desire to get into my book until the audiobook came out, and they consumed the audiobook in their drives from place to place to their meetings. And one of them, who doesn't live nearby, wrote me just a really kind note saying how much it meant to him to learn finally and understand my story. He's known me for 8 years, but never really understood where I was coming from and how much that impacted him. And then the other, who lives here nearby, told me in person what it meant to him to, to follow through my experiences. And, golly, just for those two, and for my unsighted friend in Calgary and so forth, I'm so grateful I did that audio recording. It was fun to do. And but I'm thrilled to recognize that that's a method for certain people to be able to experience my story who might not be able to experience it any other way. Dictates of Conscience by Laurie Lee Hall, read by the author. It was just so fun.
You have a really nice voice to listen to, Laurie Lee.
Oh, thank you.
Audible version.
Yeah.
And that's saying something, because sometimes authors read their books and we're like, oh, wish it was someone else. In fact, who wasn't, Landon? Do you remember in our book club years ago that always was critiquing the audio? Like if the person was right to read it.
Yeah, we had someone who gave
always give a little
critique
note like
every time on the audio version. Yep.
But it makes a difference, especially when you're reading, like, say, a Mormon centric book and they mispronounce things, which then it just kind of grates on you. So yeah, no, you did a wonderful job, Laurie Lee. Yeah, it's just
thank you.
Incredible. Yep.
At one point, Signature told me it was going to be done by AI, and I thought, oh no,
it
can't possibly be Dictates of Conscience by Laurie Lee Hall.
Yeah, that's it. So here's a question: will there be a sequel? Honestly, your life is so interesting, and as you kind of move along, people love to find out what you're doing now and what's happening. So we would be on board for a sequel for sure.
Well, it seems like my life has become less interesting in these later years, but who knows what happens going forward? This is a world of surprises and unfortunately conflict and difficulty. So there may be yet a story to be told, or perhaps a second printing with an additional chapter or a further prologue, or is that the right word?
Yeah. No, I think it's important, like we talked about, given the tone of everything, your voice is, something that could make a big difference and build bridges and understanding, because things are very different now, even than they were last year or the year before when you were writing and publishing and going on your book tours. So yeah.
An author who I quote frequently, Jennifer Finney Boylan, who is transgender and who actually transitioned in the year 2000, like many, many years ago, and who wrote her memoir, She's Not There, back in like 2002 or something. And it has stood the test of time, but it captures a moment in time when it wasn't as well understood or as controversial and challenging to be trans. And she followed up 20 years later, so in 2022, with a reprint of She's Not There with an additional chapter that said, okay, now that we see what we see, what does this all mean, kind of thing. It was very helpful to see. And I was that came out, and I read that again about the time that I started my manuscript. So yeah, maybe there'll be more at some point.
I can see it. I
Yeah.
think there's a need for it. I can absolutely see it even today. And who knows, a month from now, 2 months from now. Oh my goodness. Landon, any final thoughts? This has just been incredible. And thank you so much, Laurie Lee, for, I said, hey, we're reading your book. You're like, I'm in. It was like that.
No
She's
question.
amazing. I'm there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, she was the first author that we said, we're going to read your book first. And, this is going to be great. And she was completely just, so willing to just jump in and do this. So any final thoughts from you, Landon? This has been wonderful.
I was just thinking, if there's anything that we need at this time, it's voices of reason from both sides. I mean, I understand there's feelings on both sides, but to be able to discuss it reasonably and rationally, and to understand the lived experiences of, no matter what side you're on, and hear each other. And I think you do such a great job in that, Laurie Lee. I hope that you continue to speak out and act as a activist for a voice on this side, just to help us understand better, because I think it's so much needed right now.
Thank you for that. It occurs to me, I've got a few things coming up here shortly. I mentioned I'll be at the Exponent 2 retreat in New Hampshire this coming weekend and doing an interview there with their editor, Millie Tullis. I also have a piece that Millie and I worked on that's coming out in the Exponent 2 magazine this fall, that describes a little bit of my journey and so forth. And I also have another piece that has been written for Dialogue, the Journal of Mormon Thought, that'll be out either this fall, winter, or the coming spring. It's already been written. So those things are happening. I've got a couple of book festivals that I'm participating here in Kentucky next month, which none of you are here for, but that'll be fun. And also, I have a part in the documentary Sanctuary. If you've heard or seen anything of that, focusing on the vision and work of Utah architect Doug Staker, who has created these wonderful cardboard sanctuaries that he sets up at Pride events. They've turned that into a documentary. Autumn McAlphin and Vienna Boyce have directed it, and it's being previewed soon in Utah later this month, and is also a part of the Soho International Film Festival in Manhattan in October. It'll be previewed as well. So different places where I'm continuing to show up and to say some things. I was going to mention that in the internet age, all of these interviews, all of these podcasts, all of these discussions are out there, and they will become the primary documents of LGBTQ history for historians in the years and decades to come. And I'm so glad to be able to contribute to that with your help.
Well, you're a big, wonderful part of all of this. And if you want to give me links or dates or information, I will make sure that it's put out to everybody in the book club who might, be around in any of these places to attend. I'd love to go to the what you just described, the Sanctuary premiere. That sounds really interesting. So please share information on that. Everybody stay tuned afterwards. When we stop recording, we do have a mix and mingle where we turn the camera off, stop recording if anybody would like to, but just a few little notes to end here. The Mound Builder Myth, Fake History, and the Hunt for a Lost White Race. This is going to be presented by Jim Smith. And to be honest, I completely forgot to ask him if he would come on and give a little preview. Otherwise, he would be here in a heartbeat, because we've done a couple podcasts on Mormonish podcast with him about this concept that existed. Everybody knew about this in the early 1800s, that the indigenous population could not have possibly created these incredible mounds they were seeing. So the answer was, a white race that came from across the sea, right? This was an idea. This is not unique to Mormonism or the Book of Mormon, but a lot of people don't recognize that today. So we're going to dive into this. And like I said, it's going to be pretty mind-blowing. So everybody go out and get the Mound Builder Myth, Fake History. All right. A few other things just to mention really quick as we end here. The Good Book Club podcast. Wherever you find your audio podcast, you can listen to our meetings. It's also on YouTube. You can search the Good Book Club for Post Mormons. You can also, if you're on Facebook at all, we have the Good Media Club, where we tend to post things that have to do with Mormonism, post-Mormonism, the Sanctuary documentary. I think we'll probably post that there when I get some more information. And of course, Landon and I have Mormonish podcasts, which can be found where you find your audio or on YouTube. And we interview, a lot of people in the book club, a lot of connections from book club bring us our episodes and ideas for episodes. If you're joining us for the first time and you're not a member of the Good Book Club proper, you can send me an email at thegoodbookclub@mail.com, and I can send you information and links that way. If you're on Facebook, you can find us on Facebook. There's our logo there, and you can request to join and get information that way. If you do email me, sometimes it goes to spam, quite often when I respond, so make sure you check there. And thank you, everybody, once again, and thanks, Laurie Lee.